At 93, I have learned that losing independence rarely begins with one dramatic moment. It can begin with something as ordinary as sitting in the same chair for another hour, skipping a glass of water, sleeping badly again, or taking a medicine without remembering when anyone last reviewed it. I have watched strong people become hesitant, tired, and dependent little by little. And the frightening part is that they often did not notice the change until their world had already become smaller. But I have also watched something more hopeful. I have seen people make small changes at 72, 78, even 86, and slowly become more confident in their daily lives. I am not a doctor, and I would never pretend that food or a routine can prevent every illness. I am simply a woman who has lived long enough to notice patterns. One of the biggest patterns I have seen is this: the habits that hurt us most are often the habits that feel harmless. I remember my neighbor Margaret, who used to say, "I walk every morning, so I have earned the right to sit all afternoon." She was proud of that morning walk, and rightly so, but the rest of her day happened almost entirely from a chair. First, her legs felt stiff when she stood. Then she began holding the table. Later, she stopped carrying her own groceries. She thought she was becoming old overnight, but I watched it happen much more slowly than that. And that made me wonder something I have never forgotten. What if the real danger is not aging itself, but the little things we repeat while believing they do not matter? I began paying closer attention to people around me, and I found 5 habits appearing again and again. The first one surprised me because I had done it myself for years. The second looked responsible on the surface. The third was something almost everyone excused as normal aging. The fourth was so simple that people laughed when I mentioned it. And the fifth was invisible until it had already changed the way a person slept, ate, moved, and thought. By the end, I want to show you 3 small things I now consider worth protecting every day. But first, let me tell you how I discovered that these 5 habits were connected in a way I had never expected. I first began thinking seriously about these habits when I was in my late 70s, after a dear friend named Helen came to my kitchen and quietly admitted that she was afraid of becoming a burden to her children. Helen was 79, still living alone, still cooking, still driving, and still insisting she was fine. But I could see something had changed. She sat down more often. She drank very little water because she did not like getting up at night. She slept at different hours every evening. She took several medicines prescribed by different doctors and had not had the whole list reviewed in a long time. And whenever I asked how she was feeling, she smiled and said, "Just tired, dear." I had heard those words before. I had said them myself. Around that same time, I met an older woman from Italy who visited her daughter in our town. She was well into her 80s and moved slowly, but she moved constantly. While talking, she stood. While waiting for coffee, she walked around the kitchen. She drank water throughout the day. She went to bed at nearly the same time each night. What fascinated me was not that she was exceptionally fit. She was not. She had aching knees and admitted that some mornings were difficult. What stood out was that she had built movement and rest into ordinary life. Years later, I met a gentleman from Japan who had another habit that stayed with me. Before every meal, he seemed to ask himself one quiet question: what will give my body something useful today? Sometimes it was fish, sometimes beans, sometimes eggs, sometimes tofu, but there was usually some source of protein. He did not speak about nutrition like a scientist. He simply ate in a way that supported the life he wanted to continue living. These people made me curious. Why did some older adults seem to protect their independence through ordinary routines, while others slowly surrendered pieces of it? I started watching more closely. I noticed that long sitting often traveled with weak legs. Poor sleep traveled with worry. Dehydration traveled with tiredness, and complicated medication routines sometimes traveled with dizziness or confusion. But I also noticed something even more important. None of these habits lived alone. One could make another worse. And once I understood that, I began asking a much bigger question. If 5 quiet habits can pull a person downward together, could 3 equally simple habits help pull that person back toward strength? The first habit I learned to respect was long sitting, because I discovered that a morning walk does not automatically cancel an entire day in a chair. I remember Robert, a gentleman of 74, who walked around his neighborhood every morning for half an hour. He believed he was doing everything right, yet after breakfast he sat for hours watching television, then sat again after lunch, and finished the evening in his favorite chair. When he stood, his first few steps were stiff and uncertain. I told him something my own grandmother used to say: "A body remembers what you ask it to do." I began taking that sentence seriously. Our legs do not only need exercise, they need regular reasons to participate in ordinary life. Standing to answer the telephone, walking to the kitchen, carrying a small bag, getting up from a sturdy chair, or taking a few steps after reading can all become little reminders that the legs are still needed. The second habit is more delicate: taking several medicines without having the whole collection reviewed. I want to be very clear because this matters. I would never tell anyone to stop a prescription on their own. Medicines can be important and life-saving. What I learned is that older people sometimes have medicines added by different doctors over many years, while nobody looks at the complete picture. One pill can make a person sleepy, another can contribute to dizziness, and another may affect blood pressure. Together, those effects may matter more than anyone intended. I once knew Susan, who kept every bottle in a kitchen drawer, but could no longer explain why she took 2 of them. Her pharmacist helped her create a complete list, and she brought it to her doctor. That simple conversation gave her something I think older people deserve: clarity. The third habit is poor sleep. I used to hear people say, "I am old, so I suppose 5 hours is enough." I no longer accept that sentence without curiosity. Sleep is when the body gets a chance to rest and recover, and researchers continue studying how poor sleep may affect blood pressure, blood sugar, inflammation, mood, and memory. I noticed that people who slept badly often moved less the next day and worried more at night. But then came the habit I found even easier to overlook. It was not about what people ate. It was about what they forgot to drink. The fourth habit is not drinking enough water, and I discovered how easy it is to miss because thirst does not always remind us as strongly as it once did. I remember Mary, who could spend an entire morning drinking nothing but coffee. She was not deliberately avoiding water. She simply became busy, and by afternoon she felt tired without understanding why. Water is involved in many normal functions of the body, and some older adults may become dehydrated more easily, especially during heat, illness, or periods when they simply forget to drink. I began keeping a glass or bottle where I could see it instead of hiding it in the refrigerator. I also started using little trips as reminders. If I needed water, I would walk to the kitchen instead of keeping everything beside my chair. There is an important exception I never ignore. Some people with heart, kidney, or other medical conditions are specifically told to limit fluids. In that situation, I would follow the advice of the doctor rather than copy someone else's water routine. Then came the fifth habit, and honestly, this one took me the longest to understand because it does not look like a habit at all. It looks like life. It is chronic stress. I knew Thomas, a 79-year-old widower who worried from morning until bedtime. He worried about money, his next appointment, his children, the possibility of falling, and whether he would eventually need help. Nothing terrible happened on most days, yet his mind behaved as if danger were always around the corner. Researchers have studied how long term stress can affect sleep, blood pressure, blood sugar, inflammation, and many other parts of health. What I noticed personally was simpler. Stress made people stop doing the very things that helped them. They stayed inside, they sat longer, they slept poorly, they skipped meals or ate whatever was easiest. They withdrew from friends. One habit fed another. That was the part that frightened me most. I began to understand that healthy aging was not a collection of separate tricks. It was a web. Sitting could reduce movement. Poor sleep could increase fatigue. Fatigue could increase sitting. Stress could disturb sleep. Forgetting water could make a tired day feel harder. A complicated medication list could sometimes contribute to dizziness or confusion. But I also noticed something even more important. A person who moved a little more often sometimes slept better. Someone who ate a balanced meal with protein felt more prepared for the day. A glass of water became a reason to stand. A quiet evening became a reason to put the phone away. And that led me to the most hopeful question of all. What if one small change could quietly help several habits at once? I saw the answer in ordinary kitchens, not laboratories, and one of the clearest examples was my friend Ruth, who was already in her 80s when I met her. She did not follow a complicated diet. She ate eggs, yogurt, beans, fish, lentils, vegetables, and whatever simple foods were available to her. What caught my attention was that she rarely ate a meal that contained almost no protein. She once looked at my breakfast and laughed because I had coffee, toast, and fruit and called it a complete meal. "Where are you feeding your muscles?" she asked. I had no good answer. Over the years, I began noticing the same pattern among active older adults. They seemed to include protein throughout the day rather than saving almost all of it for dinner. Researchers study protein and muscle maintenance in older adults, and maintaining muscle matters for much more than appearance. I think about getting out of a chair, climbing stairs, carrying groceries, opening a jar, and walking across the house without hesitation. Strength is closely tied to independence. I also noticed that the healthiest older people did not treat movement as something that happened only during exercise. A woman I met in France stood while talking on the telephone. A man I knew in Canada walked to the kitchen whenever he wanted water. My cousin's neighbor carried laundry in smaller loads because she said it gave her legs another little job. None of these actions looked impressive. That was exactly why I remembered them. The people who stayed active often found reasons to move without calling it exercise. And then there was sleep. I watched people create quiet evenings almost by instinct. They lowered the lights, stopped watching upsetting news, put their phones away, and followed a familiar bedtime. I began doing the same. I also became more careful with medicines. Once or twice a year, I gathered everything I took, including over the counter products and supplements, and brought the list to a health professional. I wanted to know what each thing was for and whether it still made sense for me. I never changed a prescription because of a video, a friend, or an article. I asked questions. That gave me peace of mind. Finally, I saw how the people who handled stress best were not necessarily the people with the easiest lives. They were people who had somewhere to put their worries. They prayed, called friends, gardened, walked, read, cooked, volunteered, or simply sat quietly and breathed for a few minutes. Their problems did not disappear. They simply stopped carrying every problem every minute. By then, I had collected enough observations to try something very simple in my own life, and I want to share exactly what I changed. I did not change my whole life in one Monday morning, because at 93, I have learned that dramatic plans often create dramatic disappointment. I chose 3 small actions instead. The first was to put some protein into every main meal. I did not count every gram, and I did not buy expensive powders. I simply asked, "Where is my protein?" At breakfast, it might be an egg or plain Greek yogurt. At lunch, it might be beans, lentils, fish, chicken, tofu, or another food that worked for me. At dinner, I included another reasonable protein source. I learned from my reading and from conversations with health professionals that spreading protein across the day can be useful for maintaining muscle as we age, but individual needs are different. Anyone with kidney disease or another condition requiring protein limits should follow their own medical advice. My second action was even simpler. I started standing up about every 30 minutes. If I was reading, I stood and walked around the room. If I was watching television, I stood during a natural break. If I was talking on the telephone, I sometimes stood while I talked. I did not turn every break into a workout. I simply interrupted long periods of sitting. If I felt steady, I stretched, moved my ankles, or stood from a sturdy chair a few times. Safety came first. My third action became my evening 10-minute ritual. I wanted something gentle enough that I would actually repeat it. I began by taking a moment to drink some water, unless my doctor had given me fluid restrictions or evening fluids made my sleep worse. Then I looked at my medication list for the next day. I did not change anything. I simply asked myself whether I still understood why I was taking each item. If I had a question, I wrote it down for my doctor or pharmacist. Finally, I put my phone away and gave my mind a quieter ending. Some evenings I read. Some evenings I prayed. Sometimes I took a gentle walk or called someone I loved. Sometimes I simply sat and breathed slowly for 2 minutes. The purpose was not perfection. It was recovery. I wanted my body to understand that the day was ending. These three actions began touching several of the problems I had been worried about. Protein reminded me to care for my muscles. Standing broke up long sitting. The evening ritual gave me a chance to notice hydration, medications, sleep, and stress all at once. None of this was a miracle, and I never expected it to be. It was simply a way of making my ordinary day work a little more in my favor. And after all these years, I have learned that ordinary days are where health is built. Now I want to return to the question that frightened me when I was younger. Is it already too late? I wish I could sit beside every person watching me now, because I know what that question feels like. Have I waited too long? I asked it myself when my knees hurt, when friends became ill, and when I began wondering whether independence had an expiration date. After more than 90 years, I can tell you what I believe. I do not believe we control everything that happens to our bodies. Genetics matter. Illness matters. Accidents happen. Sometimes we do everything carefully and life still surprises us. But I have also seen, again and again, that today is not useless simply because yesterday was imperfect. If I have learned anything from the people I have known across generations and countries, it is that health is often shaped by ordinary choices, repeated quietly. Sitting less, moving a little more, reviewing medicines instead of guessing about them, giving sleep the respect it deserves, drinking enough according to your own medical needs, finding small ways to let stress settle instead of carrying it every hour, and feeding the muscles that carry you through your life. I still think about Margaret, who believed her afternoon chair was harmless. I think about Helen, who was frightened of becoming a burden. I think about Ruth, who asked me where I was feeding my muscles. And I think about the older people I met who never seemed to chase youth. They were simply protecting their ability to participate in their own lives. That is what I want for you. I do not want you to become obsessed with numbers, supplements, perfect meals, or impossible routines. I want you to wake up and feel that your body is still your partner. I want you to make your breakfast, walk to the kitchen, call someone you love, carry what you safely can, laugh when something goes wrong, rest when you need to rest, and go to bed knowing you gave yourself another ordinary day of care. If you are watching this and you have one of these habits, please do not shame yourself. I had them too. Start with one small adjustment. Tomorrow morning, ask where your protein is. Set a gentle reminder to stand every 30 minutes. Tonight, try your own 10-minute reset. If a medical condition, medication, or physical limitation makes any of these ideas inappropriate for you, please ask your doctor or pharmacist how to adapt them safely. You do not need to copy my life. You only need to care for yours. I am 93, and I still have things I want to learn, people I want to call, meals I want to cook, and mornings I want to see. That is my hope for you too. If this conversation helped you, subscribe to the channel and stay with me. I have spent a lifetime learning that the simplest lessons are often the ones worth hearing twice, and I would love to share the next one with you.